Hello, everybody, and welcome to your weekly webinar from Squibbler. This is Moxie. Today, we're going to talk about the art of persuasion. We're going to be talking about writing nonfiction that changes minds. And in this webinar, you're going to learn the importance of persuasive writing. You'll learn some tips for establishing ethos, pathos, and logos. And you'll learn some techniques for maximum persuasive impact that will really help you persuade your readers. So, what is the reason that we use persuasion in nonfiction? We do live in a world that's filled with competing ideas. So, having the ability to craft compelling, well reasoned arguments can shape opinions. It can inspire action and create meaningful change. Mastering persuasive techniques is also going to ensure that your message not only reaches your audience, but it's also going to deeply resonate and influence their thinking. Persuasive books really can change the world. There is some psychology to persuasion. As I was getting ready to do this webinar, I found this very interesting. So I thought I would include some of it to help you as you're on your writing journey. The psychology of persuasion explores how people receive, interpret, and respond to arguments. And it's going to shape whether or not they accept or resist new ideas. Readers process arguments through a combination of biases, emotions, and logic, often filtering information through their pre-existing beliefs, which is a phenomenon that we call confirmation bias. There are some barriers in human psychology and how we accept things that we read. One is cognitive dissonance. When readers encounter information that contradicts their beliefs, they may feel discomfort and either reject the new idea or adjust their thinking to reduce the tension. There's also something known as the elaboration likelihood model, or ELM. This theory suggests that people process persuasion in two ways. They process it centrally through careful analysis and peripherally through emotional cues and credibility and reception. Effective writers really balance both approaches. Another barrier could be the framing effect, and that is how we present our arguments to our readers, whether we use positive or negative framing. Writers can shape perspectives by emphasizing different aspects of this issue and using a positive or negative framing technique. Another barrier can be social proof and authority. Readers are more likely to accept arguments that align with respected sources, shared community beliefs, or expert opinions. So it's a good idea to have some of these in your writing as well. So one psychological barrier and a way to navigate it is with cognitive dissonance. If, for example, you tell an omnivore something like eating meat is harmful to your health and it's also harmful to the environment, those of your readers who eat meat and enjoy it might instinctively reject your argument. They're going to try to avoid discomfort to themselves. So instead, reframe your argument. You could say something like, many people are looking for ways to eat healthier and reduce their environmental impact. What if a simple change in diet could do both? This is going to ease your reader into a mental discussion rather than confronting them with an immediate challenge to their identities and beliefs. Another way that you can navigate one of the psychological barriers, this is with the ELM, or elaboration likelihood model. To persuade your different types of readers, because you're not entirely sure which type that you have reading your book, you can balance logic-driven and emotion-driven in your writing. For those of your readers who analyze deeply, you can provide research-based evidence. Something like studies show that plant-based diets can reduce the risk of heart disease by 30%. That will appeal to that readership. For those who are more influenced by emotions, you might use narrative or storytelling. So you could have a story like John struggled with high cholesterol for years until he switched to a plant-based diet and transformed his health. With the framing effect, you can navigate this by saying something, instead of saying meat consumption is destroying the planet, that might trigger your reader to be defensive. You could frame this positively. Adopting even one plant-based meal a day can significantly reduce your carbon footprint. This encourages your readers to think about changing what they're doing without making them feel like they're being attacked. With social proof and authority, you can navigate this psychological barrier by including information from reliable figures and experts. You could include quotes on your discussion on plant-based diets from nutritionists, or mention that top athletes like Venus Williams have adopted plant-based diets for performance benefits. The next thing that you want to consider as you're working on your persuasive book are ethos and pathos and logos. Persuasive nonfiction writers have to learn to navigate these psychological reader filters, and there are ways to do this. For ethos, you're going to have to build trust. For pathos, you want to engage with emotions. And for logos, you want to provide clear logical evidence. So with ethos, what ethos is the power of authority and trust. It's the Greek word for character and morals. And there are many ways that you can establish this trust with your reader. You can rely on expertise and experience. You can use reliable sources and data. You can demonstrate fairness and objectivity, even with those people who you are having a literary discussion with who may have an opposite position from yours. And you can also write with confidence and clarity. All of these things are going to help your reader to trust what you're saying. There are some good examples if you want to read some nonfiction books that establish ethos well. One is Matthew Walker's 2017 book, Why We Sleep. And the way that he establishes ethos is, first of all, who he is. He is a neuroscientist and a professor of psychology. This gives him credibility in discussing the science of sleep. He also uses logos, which we'll talk about in a minute. He uses facts and details and evidence by referencing decades of peer-reviewed research, and he provides clear explanations of complex neurological processes. He also avoids alarming the reader. He uses balanced arguments, practical applications, and engaging storytelling to present his findings. So why does his book work? His combination of scientific authority and research and accessible writing make readers more likely to trust and adopt his insights on sleep health. Another example is The Omnivore's Dilemma, Michael Pollan's book from 2006. He establishes ethos very well in this book. He's not a scientist, he's a journalist, but he does build credibility by deeply researching our food systems. He does engage in food production as well. He tries out hunting, farming, visiting factories, and then he also looks for experts in these fields to cite. He presents multiple perspectives as well. He doesn't just present his own without digging deep into what other options there are. He lets the reader draw the conclusion. He demonstrates fairness this way rather than bias. He also includes clear, engaging writing with rigorous investigative reporting. So he is trustworthy and that he's very open about what he's looking at and how he's investigating these things. So why do readers trust him? Why does he develop ethos? Well, Pollan combines firsthand experience. He goes and experiences these things he's writing about. He uses expert testimony, and he's even-handed in the way he approaches these different types of food gathering sources. So here are some top tips for building ethos in your writing. You want to demonstrate expertise. You use research, firsthand experience, or professional background to build credibility. Show fairness and objectivity. You want to acknowledge that there are counter arguments and avoid one-sided narratives. One way that you can do this with Squibbler's AI is to use that objective tone in your writing, and also to do some research with the Ask Squibbler feature that you have, where you can do some research and find out fact-based information for your persuasive argument. You can also use clear and engaging language. You want to make sure that your ideas are accessible for the reader and they're not overwhelming, that you're not just shutting them out. They're included in the conversation you're trying to have. And another way is to incorporate some storytelling. Personal anecdotes and real-world examples make arguments more relatable and trustworthy as well. The next element that we'll talk about is pathos, and this is where you're going to appeal to your audience's emotions. Pathos is the use of emotional appeal, and it's in Greek, it was the word for suffering or experience. So some of the techniques we have for developing pathos are storytelling and personal anecdotes. You use vivid language and imagery. You can use relatability and shared values with your reader. You do want to be careful, though, to avoid manipulating or overusing emotion for your readers. Readers are savvy. They're onto this, so they'll understand if you're trying to play on their emotions. So here are some examples of where pathos is done well. In Brian Stevenson's 2014 expose of the criminal justice system, Just Mercy, he uses pathos to advocate for criminal justice reform. He is a lawyer, and he's investigating the story of Walter McMillan, who was wrongfully convicted and on death row. Stevenson humanizes people that are affected by the justice system. He makes the readers feel anger, empathy, and urgency with these subjects that he's writing about. He shares personal experiences, including his own struggles with the legal system and the emotional toll it takes on him. So it makes the narrative very personal and compelling. Why does this work? Why does pathos work in this example? Readers are going to connect emotionally with the individuals that Stevenson is writing about. We do read this book and feel a sense of outrage at the injustice, and we also feel his same shared hope for change. His storytelling is going to make the abstract issue of criminal justice reform feel immediate and personal. Another example is I Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai, and this is from 2013. So she also uses pathos in her writing, and she describes her firsthand experience of being shot by the Taliban for advocating for girls' education. And this makes her story immediately gripping and emotional. She describes her fear, her pain, her determination. And as readers, we empathize with the struggles that she has as a young girl who just wants to be educated. She also shares her love for her family and her country, as well as her strong sense of hope. So this creates a powerful emotional connection with the readers. Why does her story work with pathos? It's both heartbreaking and uplifting, and it uses personal hardship to highlight a larger global issue. So her resilience also inspires action and advocacy. So, to develop emotions, there are some tips for you. Use personal stories. Readers connect more with individuals than with just abstract ideas. They can put a name to a concept and a face to a concept. They can also evoke a universal emotions. So, work with things like fear and hope and injustice. These resonate deeply with your readers. You also want to make sure that you show and don't just tell. Use vivid descriptions and sensory details to make emotional moments more powerful. There are two ways to do this with Scribbler's AI. You can use the rewrite, show, don't tell function. You can also use the describe function, and which includes the five senses, the vision and sight and smell and touch and so forth, to develop this sense of vivid descriptions. You also want to make sure you're balancing emotion with substance. Too much emotion without facts can feel manipulative. So ground it also in real experiences and data when you're working on your nonfiction persuasive book. The third part of our rhetorical triangle, things to aim for, is developing logos. And logos is the use of fact and evidence in an argument. It's the Greek word for discourse or reason. There are some techniques for evoking it. You want to look at the importance of using logic and evidence in your writing. You want to make sure you're structuring a clear and coherent argument. You want to make sure you're thinking about anticipating and addressing counter arguments. You know that there might be another position, and you have an idea in your head of how you're going to address that. Logos also relies on data, analogies, and logical reasoning to make its case. So some example of where logos is done well. One is Yuval Harari's famous book, Sapiens, on the history of humankind. And he uses logos to build his arguments on anthropology, history, evolutionary biology, and he uses a wide range of academic sources. It's well researched. He systematically explains how human cognition and economics and social structures evolved and makes this logical connection between historical events and modern society. And he also writes engagingly. He breaks down these complex topics and concepts into simple, structured arguments that flow logically from one chapter to the next. So his approach by using logos works well because his interdisciplinary evidence and logical sequencing make his broad claims about human history feel well supported and intellectually rigorous. Another example is Freakonomics. This is a very popular book on economics by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner from 2005. They use data-driven examples to challenge conventional wisdom on topics like crime rates, education, and economics. They also apply economic principles and statistical analysis to surprising social questions, such as why drug dealers often live with their mothers. They also use structure logically, walking readers through data sets, causation and correlation, and counterintuitive findings. Why does this book work? It was very popular. The book is engaging because it presents logical arguments in an accessible way. It uses real-world data and clear reasoning to make complex ideas understandable and thought-provoking. So to develop logos, there are some tips for you. Use data and research. Facts, statistics, and studies strengthen logical appeals. Structure your arguments clearly. Build step-by-step reasoning so readers can follow your conclusions. You can even start this process with Scribbler prior to writing. You can put your ideas into the AI outline creation and start to develop how you're going to plot your book out with the outline. You want to make sure that you distinguish correlation from causation. Look at potential counter arguments and logical fallacies that might influence or harm your argument. Also, very important is explain complex ideas simply. Clarity and logical flow are going to make technical subjects persuasive. They'll make your writing more engaging, and you'll pull your reader in as well. So we do have 5 steps for you on getting maximum impact in persuasive writing. One is to make sure that you're crafting compelling openings and closings, introductions and afterwards. We'll talk about that briefly. Another is to use strong, active language. Another step is to use rhetorical devices that strengthen arguments. You also want to pay attention to this tone and style of your writing in persuasive writing. And then you also want to investigate and use narrative in persuasion. So for crafting compelling openings and closings, you might start with a hook in your introduction that creates curiosity or emotion. The first few sentences should grab your reader's attention immediately. Use a surprising fact, a thought-provoking question, or a powerful anecdote to pull them in. In a recent book I was just reading on cancer, the writer begins with an introduction talking about a young cancer patient he had, and it really did compel me to want to read more in the book. With something like climate change, you might start with, by the time you finish reading this, another football field of rainforest will have disappeared. The question is, does it have to be this way? This is thought-provoking. This approach is going to make readers curious and emotionally invested from the start. With your closing or your afterwards, end with a call to action or a thought-provoking takeaway that your reader can think about. Your conclusion should lead a lasting impression, reinforcing your argument and giving the reader something to reflect or act upon. Instead of just summarizing, inspire action or leave them with a memorable idea. For instance, if you're writing about the power of storytelling, you might think about every moment, every breakthrough, every shift in history started with a story. What story will you tell? This creates a sense of responsibility and engagement and ensures that your message is going to linger long after your reader has finished reading. Some more techniques for maximum impact in persuasive writing is to be aware of the language you're using. Use powerful verbs. Avoid weak passive constructions and replace them with strong action-driven verbs. So instead of saying something like, the policy was criticized by many experts, use experts condemn the policy. This makes your writing more direct, engaging, authoritative, and strengthens your argument. You can use Scribbler's quick edits or the rewrite custom function to make sure that you're writing with powerful language in active voice. You also want to eliminate any unnecessary qualifiers or filler words. So weak phrases like I think, it seems, or somewhat are going to dilute the strength of your argument. Instead of saying this solution could possibly help reduce pollution, this solution could possibly help reduce pollution, you want to write this solution reduces pollution. Confident and precise language are going to make your argument more persuasive and credible as well. Another technique for improving the impact your persuasive writing can have is the use of rhetorical devices. So look at using things like anaphora to reinforce key ideas. Anaphora is the repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of sentences, and they're going to create rhythm and an emphasis, which makes your argument more memorable. So, for example, we demand justice, we demand change, we demand a better future. That is a really impactful series of sentences, and the repetition strengthens the message and keeps your reader engaged. You'll see this a lot in political writing, something like, this is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Another rhetorical advice is using analogies and metaphors to make complex ideas relatable. So you can take an abstract idea and compare it to something familiar to help your readers get the argument more easily. So instead of saying social media can influence opinions, you might say social media is a modern-day battleground where ideas clash and spread like wildfire. A well-placed analogy makes your writing more persuasive and vivid as well. And Scribbler's AI can do this for you. You can use the describe function, highlight the part that you'd like to create a metaphor with, and then use the metaphor tab. You also want to make sure that your tone is something that you're thinking about with writing persuasive language. You want to match your tone to your audience for maximum impact. Your tone should align with the expectations and emotions of your audience. So you do want to think about who you're trying to reach and what tone you should use with them. A formal and authoritative tone are going to work really well for academic or policy arguments, while a conversational, relatable tone is more effective for personal essays or advocacy writing. For example, if you wanted to talk about climate change to policymakers, you might write decisive action is required to curb emissions before irreversible damage occurs. But if you're speaking to a general audience, you might lose them if you speak like that. So you could say something like, every small action, like biking instead of driving, helps protect our planet for future generations. With style, you also want to think about the style that you're going to adopt for your persuasive writing. Maintain a confident, balanced style to build credibility. A persuasive argument is weakened by extreme language, excessive emotion, or overcomplicated writing. So instead of sounding overly aggressive, something like anyone who disagrees is completely ignorant, adopt a firm but respectful style. While some argue otherwise, the evidence overwhelmingly supports this conclusion. That's a lot kinder to your critics, and it also won't alienate your readers. A balanced, confident style makes you seem more credible and persuasive to your skeptical readers. You also want to look at using narrative in your persuasive writing. Personal stories can create an emotional connection, that pathos that we are looking for. People are more likely to be persuaded by stories than by statistics alone. A compelling personal narrative can make abstract ideals feel real and relatable. So instead of just citing data about student debt, for example, tell the story of a recent graduate who's struggling to make ends meet despite working multiple jobs. This is going to humanize the issue and makes it more impactful as well. Another tip for writing narratives is just to structure your argument like a story for greater engagement. Even when you're presenting facts, framing your argument with a clear narrative arc, a beginning, a conflict, and resolution can keep readers invested. For instance, if you're writing about the dangers of misinformation, start with an individual who fell victim to a false claim. Describe the consequences they felt and end with a solution. A strong narrative flow helps readers process and remember your message more effectively. So, just for fun, if you want to look at some really strong examples of rhetorical writing and persuasive writing, you might take a look at Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail. Look at the strategies he employs, or something like George Washington's inaugural speech when he just became president of the United States. Obviously, you don't have to look to just American or United States writing, but these are two that just I thought of right away when I think about good persuasive writing. So you'll read these, think about the persuasive strategies these writers use, and see if you can use any of the strategies they employ. So in this webinar, we did review the importance of persuasive writing. We looked at tips for establishing ethos, pathos, and logos. We looked at some good examples of persuasive writing. And we looked at some techniques for writing really good, impactful, persuasive writing. Thank you, as always, for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.